Matthew Holt. I'm here with a THCB Spotlight with my old buddy, Ryan Tarzy. Ryan, good to see you, man. It's been a while. Well, actually, it hasn't been a while. We saw each other a couple of weeks ago, but
Yeah,
you've had some changes in your work life, and you're now at a company called Prealize, which I've never heard of until I realized that it was used to be called Cardinal Analytics, right?
that's right.
So real quick, what are you doing at Prealize? And then we're going to use your career and our meeting at the HLTH Health Conference last week to skip back down memory lane a bit. But tell me just 5 seconds about what you do with all of the Prealize and what you guys are up to.
Yeah, so I joined a little over 90 days ago now as the Chief Commercial Officer. And that's, again, a little bit of a new role that we've heard more in the industry, but essentially in charge of all commercial activities, so sales, business development, account management, and implementation, as well as marketing.
Right. So Cardinal Analytics, formed by a bunch of superstars at Stanford, Nick Amshaw, Arnie Milstein, Tom McKinley, the VC from was involved. A bunch of others. Our son actor was there in the early days. Basically, looking at as Prealize is a pretty good name. It's looking at trying to figure out who is going to be sick out of people you don't think are going to be sick. Basically, is that right? Close enough?
Yeah. Well, really moving towards proactive healthcare. Right. So traditional care management analytics has always been looking backwards, more retroactive, and everything we're doing is about using advanced machine learning and AI to identify future high costs, or really the way I look at it in terms of our mission is being able to identify patients that are about to go through a really bad time. And hopefully we can intervene, map them to the right intervention that's available to them so that we can get them back on the rails and avoid that going forward. So.
All right. Okay, so let's switch gears a bit. We met up in Vegas last week, and we sort of slapped you on the back, and I noticed your new logo. Actually, sit up so you can see your new logo. It's on
There we go.
Oh, yeah. Okay. This is below the camera. Right, you can sit down again now. And, there were a lot of people at HLTH, around 6,000 or so. A lot of companies there, a lot of excitement. Now, but then again, now I'm going to get this wrong, but you were at the very first Health 2.0, and you've been around the space a little bit before that. And in those days, you were the CEO of a startup called MetaKeeper.
That's right, MetaKeeper.
And now I'm going to try and remember this. I'm going to try and get your history right along, because you went to Healthline. That's
right.
And then somewhere else, and then Cover My Meds. No, am I missing two?
No, you're right. Pocket Doc.
I forgot Pocket Doc. Yes, good point. For a while.
Healthline, then Pocket Doc, then in between, worked with my wife to start a startup in the early child development space called Playful Bee, and then Cover My Meds, and then Prealize.
Right, so Cover My Meds was, so out of that lot, some interesting companies, right? What happened to MetaKeeper? Is it still bumping along?
It sure is. In fact, just announced a major partnership with Emblem Health. Is about to announce another one with a Blue in California. So yeah, still popping along. It's like one of those things I was just telling you, it's like a 15-year overnight success. Except in this case, I think it's actually 16 years since we founded in 2003.
Wow.
So yeah, the company has really been chugging along. Surviving is the number one thing, as you know, in startups and healthcare. And the CEO who took over for me is still the CEO, and the company is still doing well and has a number of large self-insured employers and now increasingly health plans in the wellness space.
All right. So then if we go chunk through that, Healthline ended up splitting into two companies and getting a decent enough exit, at least on one of them, right? Talix and Healthline. And Healthline's actually grown as a consumer.
Yeah, I don't know that it's actually either this exit as far as I know. What I understand, they're both still plus independent entities. Talix is the former enterprise division of healthcare that I worked mostly on, still led by Dean Stevens. And then the other side, Healthline Media, is not only still around, but absolutely thriving. In fact, just past WebMD is the number one place on the health web. So
yeah, and I'm on consumer side. It's pretty interesting. And then Pocket Doc had kind of a rocket ship rise, and then ended up getting, I'm not sure it's sold for scrap or sold for parts to change, but was sort of shifted towards the blockchain. And I actually just saw Lisa Mackey the other day at Health, and who was the original CEO there, who's now gone back to Microsoft. And then you've got the real rocket ship, which is Cover My Meds. So tell me a bit about what happened when you joined there, what Cover My Meds did, and where that ended up.
Sure. I feel so fortunate to have gotten connected to Cover My Meds, actually through someone I went to college with, 2 degrees of separation. It was all over related to a drink in Buenos Aires, apparently, is what I like.
Of course, yeah.
It
as these things do. Right?
Yeah,
Most good career moves happen drinking.
Absolutely. So it led to a conversation with this company in Columbus that I had never heard of, that was already at that point rocketing towards 100 million in revenue, and had gotten a really nice growth investment from Francisco Partners. And I, Matthew, I tried to pride myself on knowing just about everybody in the digital health ecosystem, and I never heard of this company that had this great story at that time, and was really intrigued, and kind of went out of my normal path to join a later stage startup. It was about 200 something employees at that time, joined in a business development role in the provider vertical, and in less than 4 years had 5 different jobs, saw the company go from 200 something to over 1,000. Over the course of the time there, got acquired by McKesson for what ultimately became $1.4 billion. And through the process, I mean, most importantly, learned what it took to build a company that grows like that. Just a tremendous set of leaders that I learned from Matt Scantlin, the CEO, to Alan Scantlin and Sam Rajan, the founders, to my direct boss, Scott Gaines. Just really probably my number one learnings were actually about culture, and about the basic things like how to do one-on-ones really well, how to build leaders underneath you so that you can continue to grow. I mean, we grew between 40 to 80% of our bottom line of our people, not just our revenues. But when you're growing as a company at 40 to 80% of your employees, you have to build leaders underneath you, or you can't possibly sustain that and still keep a great culture.
Yeah, pretty exciting. And Cover My Meds was literally was doing that. It was pre-authorization. It was like created a whole new category of pre-authorization.
Whole new category, yeah.
Right.
Pre-auth, or the first pre-auth existed. Electronic pre-auth didn't exist, to be clear.
Pre-auth without having some poor sap at the doctor's office on the phone with the PBM trying to find somebody for weeks, days, weeks, and years. So really, I mean, but a proper use of health technology to fix what I call an admin problem, So let's yak a little bit about what happened last week, right? I want to contrast this. So in 2006, I started getting harassed by a bunch of people who said, no one else is talking about this weird new space of health technology. There's these little companies. Google's now gone public. There's a bit of money around Silicon Valley that hadn't been there a couple of years before. There are a few companies like sort of Healthlines and, Sermos and patients like me that are kind of emerging out of the woodwork. And then you've got Google and Microsoft are about to do something, right? This is back in 06, 07. So I met with Indu Sabaya. We said, we'll put together a small meeting and see what happens, right? And you were there. And that was the first Health 2.0. And we said, we're going to show a bunch of technology. We're going to see if we can get, a new way of thinking about this. And, we also went on a journey that I didn't expect us to go on.
Yeah.
All the time you were doing that. And I think you said something to me, and I like you to expand on this, that you saw a bunch of those people again last week. There are 6,000 people in Vegas. There's a new conference that has raised venture capital and is doing stuff and spending a boatload of money while doing it. The HLTH goes. Really very interested to see what's happened over the last basically decade with a ton of investment. So you had some thoughts about that. So why don't you just tell me what you said off camera, on camera?
Yeah, my initial reaction when I saw just attending it was my first time attending. I didn't attend the first year, and I've, as you know, been to every Health 2.0 event. My first reaction was just incredible pride, and that sounds just really, that it's not in this. Obviously, it sounds crazy. I didn't create any of this, but pride in the ecosystem and where we are as in digital health here in the U.S. We certainly have a long way to go. But if you look at where we were in 2007 versus where we are now, to have an event like this and the type of people who are there, the scale of the event, That is, you can tie directly a correlation back to that first event in 2007 with the first Health 2.0 event. And we all know that this would never have happened if it hadn't have been because of you and Indu starting Health 2.0 and all the OGs that were involved, Jane and Alex Drain and all the people in that attended from the beginning and built Health 2.0 into the event that it was, that I think it's evolved to this tremendous thing where we could have that kind of energy and money and excitement and government officials all focused on how do we use technology. We didn't even call it digital health back then, right? It was health tech. Health tech and digital health combining together to make the U.S. healthcare system a better place for patients, right? Ultimately, that's what this is about.
Yeah, I think that's, well, that's very nice of you to say, and I think that there was a lot going on back in the day. And, we weren't the very, very first. There were some other sort of conferences in around about that space. But I think we were the first of, let's take this Silicon Valley notion of cloud-based technology and spread it. And obviously there was a lot of excitement at the time about what Google and Microsoft were about to do.
Sure.
Kind of ironic considering that, I got my final notice, yesterday that the Microsoft Health Audit is done. Google Health is back, but it's back in a very different guise than it was.
Different way, yeah.
But all the other stuff that we showed at that conference really, I think exploded forwards and surprised people in the way that, the big guys didn't think about it. Now, bunch of other stuff was going on, right? Not the least of which we had the Obama administration with high tech. Now that there's a lot of complaining about what happened, but nonetheless, focusing that amount of money, effort, and energy on health technology to try to improve care had this sort of spin-off effect that there was a business on top of and around that. And I think that, we were, I don't think people were even really counting, but back in, 07, 08, I mean, there was some venture capital activity back in 06, 07, 08. There were some companies raising, I remember Sermo raised about 30, 40 million back in those, and a few of the others were raising that kind of numbers. But the massive explosion you saw after the recession, sort of 2010, where it was about $1 billion to, depending who you believe, it's either, 7 or 12 billion done last year, depending on whether we start up Health, Rock Health, or Merck in the middle. To me, that is something that none of us could actually have predicted. So I think that's probably a big part of it. And there are a lot of other players as well. I mean, let's not forget, the Rock Health, the Blueprint Health, the Smart Health, and a ton of other, DreamX, a ton of places.
Important parts of the ecosystem. I mean, absolutely. I mean, when I was starting my first startup, there was no place to go to start a health tech startup. And especially being in San Diego where we started, the investors, if they existed for healthcare, were life science investors, which is very different than investing in health tech or consumer health or digital health nowadays. So the ecosystem didn't exist. And Health 2.0 put a focus on it. There were a lot of VCs there, I remember, at the very first event, starting to sniff along. And there was people like Venrock and Bob that have done, some really critical investments in Castlight and others. And there was, of course, the Rock Health and the Startup Health were very important in the ecosystem, because now there was a place for entrepreneurs that didn't know anything about healthcare, but were passionate about, had maybe done something in another field and wanted to come into healthcare. There was now a place to go and a little bit of a toolkit that you could start to learn. And we should also remember people like Todd Park, and what he did with Datapalooza and his enthusiasm that, of course, Obama kind of unlocked and allowed to happen. But fundamentally, people like that was a critical part of the ecosystem and creating this movement towards APIs and open healthcare that, Seema and Don Rucker have just, continued. But it started back then.
Yeah, I was going to say that the people we had mentioned, right, so it's the government, which was, I think if you go down the line at HHS and ONC, which were kind of parallel tracks, you had obviously Dave Bloomfield starting with at ONC, and then Farzad Mostashari continuing on.
Sure, Farzad,
Karen Salvo and all the way through to Don now. You had a bunch of people around them, sort of Jacob Ryder, Will Yu at the Office of Science, helping out. And then on the CTO side, right, you then had Todd, Brian Sivak, and then later on Susanna Fox, obviously Bruce Greenfield and others, coming all the way to Simcox now. But, you've got those parallel tracks, so let's free up the data. Let's put a lot of attention on startups. Let's find a bit of that ONC money. Most of it's going to go to, most of it went down to Wisconsin or to Kansas City or wherever else it went. But a little bit of it dribbled out to the folks at Smart. So Cam Mandel and Josh Mandel and Sai Cohan, thinking about Smart and Smart on Fire, which came out of that. A little bit dribbled it to the competition world. We got a little bit of that at Health 2.0 on our challenges. 10 years old today is Luminary Labs. With Sarah there, and her team, who've done a whole bunch of different open innovation work. So Hollaback, that is. And then, I think you can go across the ecosystem. So at one point, I think Lisa Sinan did a analysis. There were like 120 incubators. There were health boxes and a ton of people doing that. And so there's a lot of places to go, a lot of enthusiasm to come and sort of help entrepreneurs get into the system more easily, get people in from other industries, and then sort of thinking about what could they actually do. So that all sounds great. We're all patting each other on the back. It's all fantastic. We do have, I'm struck by HLTH. I wrote some somewhat cynical stuff about it last year. I actually had a great time at the conference. I was a little, there was a lot of money on display at the conference. A lot of money, there's a lot of money in the system. That I go both ways, whether that's good or bad. But there were 6,000 people there. And even if I take like Health 2.0's height, which is around a couple of thousand, a Connected Health or ML Summit, which is around the same number, a bit higher. I don't know where all these extra people came from. So where do they come from? Who are you seeing there that you hadn't seen before?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that what we started to see was just the amount of entrepreneurs, first of all,
right?
Which Health 2.0 always had, but it felt like it was, the number of startup CEOs that were there trying to connect with VCs or make partnerships seemed greater than ever before. I also, I did the startup dating, the speed dating, which was not the startup dating, but the speed dating, which was, direct, I think, stealing from your venture. What did you guys call it? Was it
we had a bunch of them. We had something called Match Point, Traction. We had Venture Connect. We had all kinds of stuff.
Exactly. So the types of meetings that I was getting at Prealize was, I think, very indicative of the number of people that were coming from, large health systems, from Atrium, from Intermountain, from as well as health plans, the IBCs and Highmarks of the world, right? So we got some of that at Health 2.0, but I feel like it varied in and out. And it felt like it was, maybe it's just that we've gotten to this point where everybody feels like they need to be connecting with the latest, greatest. And they like to come to Vegas too. That's got to be cool, right?
Yeah, I've been.
We never had a conference in Vegas before.
Well, I'm sure there had been one, but I've been suffering my sore throat from the excess smoke ever since. But plus, I rode the monorail and it was damn cold a couple of days. But better than being in California, where my family had no electricity and my kind of grumpy I was gone. But about that.
Right.
So I think I actually thought it was very impressive. It's great to see that there are that many people who care about changing the system. Okay, let's now flip maybe ask you the question the other way around. So it's been, you said you've been more than a decade and a half for you. I've been in healthcare for talking about new stuff. And we remember WebMD and Halcyon before it was WebMD back in the day. I'm always kind of kidding that HLTH was the stock ticker for Halcyon, right? Which was a massive boom and a massive bust. And yet that's what they call that conference.
Yeah.
In other words, whether it's a homage or whether it's a kind of a joke or whether they just didn't know. But anyway, but on the other hand, it's been a long time, right? And if you look at the healthcare system as a whole, what have we got? We've got big, powerful health plans who are more or less the same guys they were back then. We have huge, big, consolidated hospital groups who are bigger and richer and have higher margins than they were then. We have the same predominantly big pharma companies and medical device supply companies and many of the same tech companies within the health system. We're all bigger and richer. I'm not sure we've changed it as much as I thought we could or would like to have done. So where do you stay on sort of, where are we in this evolution of making it better for patients, better value, more transparent, all the stuff we talked about back in 06, 07, 08?
Yeah, I think if I were to look back, when we first had the conference and saw where we were now, I think I would be disappointed that we weren't as far along as a country. So I probably am disappointed on how far we've come as a country in terms of changing the health system. But at the same time, I have tremendous amount of optimism. Now, maybe that's just being an entrepreneur, and you have to be an optimist to survive what it is to go through being an entrepreneur, especially in healthcare. But I really do think there's evidence to support that. I think that, everything in healthcare takes longer. That's the thing we have to remember. The things that normally would take 5 to 7 years take 10 to 15 in terms of building companies here. And I think if you look at the ecosystem, there's a lot of good signs to point to. First of all, look at the IPOs that we've had in the last 18 months. Ironically, one of them, Frisia, launched at your first Health 2.0, if I remember correctly.
I think it was the second, actually. I think it was early 08.
It was second, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the early ones, right?
Good memory of that.
Right, and then, if you look at the success that an Allscripts has had and others, Athena, that were not significant companies at the stage, certainly not what they are now when we were first starting. We could all argue whether that turned out the way we wanted to for patients, but at the end of the day, with the combination of that and the APIs that are now being unlocked, and it seems very clear from the comments that I heard that they're serious about continuing the path of 21st Century Cures Act and opening up the interoperability. And then hearing Adam and what he was saying about the shift
to Adam Boehner?
Adam Boehner, yeah. So the shift to fee-for-service, I mean, he's given a picture of a world where fee-for-service largely doesn't exist in 5 years. So whether you believe that or not, that gives you an indication of the direction the government is taking to accelerate. So we have now successes out there with IPOs, Livongo, Frisia, Health Catalyst, others have been acquired like Cover My Meds. That creates another ecosystem that builds on it. There's already been several startups that have been kind of come out of Cover My Meds. And so you see this ecosystem that's just growing and growing. And as we were mentioning earlier, if you're an entrepreneur that wants to do something innovative in healthcare, there's a pathway and there's funding and experienced investors and mentors. It's totally different than where we were, where maybe it was a little bit hopeful and naive,
Right.
where we were in 2007, 2008. I don't think we're naive anymore. I think we know what the challenges are. I think that there's capital to support it. And I'm optimistic about the next 5 years.
So I'm interested about this next 5 years transition because I remember one of the panels I sat in at Health was Pam Kahili from Blue Cross Arizona, CEO. Actually, it was great. Two old stodgy Blue Crosses, Anthem and Arizona. I was saying, so Pam Kahili was on this panel with Gail Boudreau and also with Joe Kilea, now Voda. And they were talking about, Gail was mostly saying artificial intelligence. Pam from Blue Cross Arizona was saying something very interesting, which was that, a lot of patting ourselves on the back about great value-based care and all that stuff, but really it's only about 10% of the dollars in Arizona. Mm-hmm. I actually did a study when I was at Institute for the Future in 1997. What I looked at was that there was, how did doctors nationwide get paid? And quote unquote, we didn't call it value-based care, then we called it full or partial capitation, but it was about 10%. So it was about the same, right? So we've gone swings and roundabouts. We haven't really moved in the last 20 years as much, anyway, as much as being expected in the next 5 years. So I guess when Adam, says that CNMI is moving, and by the way, he's just quit, so I'm a bit confused about his role, but when it says that we're going to move there quickly, you're hearing a lot of stuff about how can we work with providers as plans, put them at risk. How can employers aggressively go around the system, go to companies like Livongo or Armada, do stuff around the system to try to do things very different.
What Haven is doing, right, with JP Morgan.
Haven, right, it's come out. Well, they came out somewhat disappointing. Well, who knows? First announcement didn't sound that exciting, but I'm wondering is how fast it's really going to be in the next few years, because most of not all of, but a significant chunk of the big bets that have been placed by the VCs and by even strategic investors
are thinking that we're going to see a very different way that we're going to pay and deliver care in the next, let's say,
Yeah.
5 to 10 years.
Well, we've certainly seen it start in Medicare Advantage, right? And, it seems that was certainly one of the themes of HLTH is that everybody is trying to do something specifically to serve that market. Not everybody, but a large number of the players there. And, what I understand is that we're going to cross over more than 50% of Medicare being on Medicare Advantage within the next 2 years. That's a pretty significant milestone. I mean, yes, it's for a subset of the market. And if that continues to be good business and good for patients, that's something that is going to, people are noticing, are going to follow. I think we're seeing that in managed Medicaid as well. I just had one of our customers that just took on a big managed Medicaid at-risk contract. And then I think we're also seeing it even at the Blues level. So one of our customers we work with, now this is one that has a significant market share, more than the majority in their state. They've moved their providers aggressively and essentially said, you take a value-based contract with upside and downside risk or you're out of our network. And so if these models continue to show success for both sides, particularly for the payer and for the end payer, the employer, I think we're going to start to see it move pretty aggressively. Maybe not in 5 years, but more so than we've seen over the last 20.
Yeah, I thought, I mean, I don't think you were in the room when Fatah Mostashari, who these days is out of government and now at LDAID,
Yeah.
Gathering together independent doctors and creating ACOs out of them, was having an argument with
Rashika
Fitnapoli, right, from IORA. But Rashika was saying, no, we've got to take Medicare Advantage, we've got to go to the government, we've got to take full capitation, we've got to dominate the whole spectrum. And Fatah was saying, we can do it, we can change the way all primary care doctors behave. Now, I saw Fatah out in the corridor later, and he got very grumpy with me because I called him a flea. I said, look, at the moment, there are two fleas arguing about who owns the dog, right? Because at the moment, he didn't like that much. But here's the point, right? At the moment, it's not much of the market they're arguing. I mean, right, Medicare Advantage is growing. There aren't many people in ACOs, and most primary care is still there feeding the beast of the big healthcare systems. Mm-hmm. But you can imagine that kind of growth is going to demand a very different way that we think about paying for care and all the kind of services that get delivered. And I would add what you're doing on the analytics side into that are going to come into a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to change the way our healthcare system works. And, we've had these conversations with health systems. I won't say the which, but they've essentially said they have to take on risk in order to move towards delivering care the way they want to deliver care. That there's this kind of minimum level of risk or minimum amount of your total revenue that is coming from capitation. And when you hit that threshold, then the way you operate as a health system completely changes, and you start to look much more like an Intermountain than like a traditional large health system. And I think we're approaching that, and there's that recognition. And I think it's important to notice that the reason why the IORAs are important and the devoted, if they're, as they're successful in ChenMed, and is they can show that you can also be very financially successful by doing medicine that way, right? And I think that that's been important for the ecosystem to see that it's not the end of the world for these incumbents if they move towards these models. And frankly, if they don't, they're going to probably get disrupted unless they have a monopoly in their market, right? I think that was, somebody said that, I forget who said it, was the best business is a monopoly. Was that Rashika?
Might have been. And there's a lot of them about, right?
Yeah.
Fact, just I think just last week, Sutter had to settle, what on what terms about basically its fee structure and its costs in Northern California, and they've been pretty close to it in some areas there. So yeah,
I totally agree, and I think that's not a problem that's probably going to be solved without government intervention.
Sure.
So there's some monopolies that, those are the disappointing part of healthcare that hasn't changed or maybe has gotten worse. But I think we see other areas of disruption and optimism all around. And the more that these models are successful, the more others will go that way. And like you said, a whole different ecosystem of vendors and partners like Prealize that are perfectly set up to support the movement towards proactive healthcare, towards a population health management approach to when you have a capitated model versus a fee-for-service model?
Yeah, I think there's probably three major areas, and I wrote a piece about this a while back, and I think the three IPOs that we had in the summer, four if you kick in Teladoc, so
Sure.
IPO, characterize this, which is you've got we've got organizations who are kind of making the current system run more effectively, efficiently. So Phreesia's clearly doing that, taking a bunch of stuff that was on paper and putting it into a computer in a format that a consumer and a patient and a doctor can use it. You've got people like Health Catalyst and Prealize in this bucket who are taking data and doing things with it that were not possible before. But A, there wasn't the data around, and B, the models that you guys are running and they're running, and the attempt people are building to say, how can you use this data to figure out how to intervene earlier and better? And then you've got the Livongos of the world who are saying, let's go all the way to the end, go to the house of the consumer, and stop with and everybody I see is doing this, going away from the point, once every 3 months or every 6 months we see someone with a chronic illness all day. Can we manage them all day, every day? Can we figure out what that behavior change looks like? And and generate that data. And we're just starting. I mean, they've grown like wildfire, but it's super early. I mean, they also launched Health 2.0 back in 2014 when Glenn came on stage, and I was kidding about how he'd left all scripts where he was always going about, well, the cloud may be an interesting thing, but we have this on-premise stuff, and now he's a cloud-only guy, right?
Yeah.
And I'm kind of kidding about that, but they've grown fast, but it's a recent thing, and they're also, I was kind of kidding with them and Amada and Onduo, because they're all sort of fleas argument who owns the dog. There's a few 100,000 people in each of those platforms, and yet we have 30-odd million people with diabetes who probably could use being one of those platforms, So it strikes me as the early days.
Early days, lots of room for growth.
But those are the three kind of big areas. If you add in Teladoc, which is sort of this immediate acute care for sick people, for healthy people, and slowly that's, they just, not with them, but Livongo just sort of deal with doctors on demand and with ND Live, and we're starting to see, I think Teladoc did deal with Vida. So you're starting to see integration of coaching and all-round chronic illness management with these remote platforms. You're starting to see a whole bunch of this stuff emerging. So I'm actually, I'm very encouraged about that.
Well, and I think you could draw a direct line. You're right to mention Teladoc. I should have thought of them. I think you can draw a direct line to Teladoc and Livongo and all the different kind of digital, let's call it out of clinic ways to encounter the healthcare system, right? Teladoc, a lot of the use cases are around not going into the clinic or honestly avoiding an unnecessary ER visit, right? So a lot of what we're thinking about, and then what we're thinking a lot about is how do we connect the patient who's at risk for having a bad event and really going off the cliff a year from now? How do we connect them, identify them, first of all, which is the hard part. We can do that. The next part is how do we figure out, are they likely to engage on a digital platform or on a telephonic platform, and then map them to the right intervention. And that intervention might be care management, but it might be making sure that they know about virtual visits through Teladoc, or it might be letting them know about Livongo, and marketing to them in a very targeted way to make sure that they're a good candidate and could get enrolled in a program like that. So I think there's actually a lot of similarities in many ways if you look at the future ecosystem to what Teladoc or MD Live does, or Doctor on Demand, and what we're seeing from a Livongo and Onduo, Amada, Propeller, these other kind of leading, again, early stages, but leading solutions that have gotten some traction.
Yeah. So let's to wrap it up a bit. If I was to sort of, put you've been looking at this a long time, like I have. If I was to put the gun to your head and said, okay, couple of things. Who's the next? Assuming the stock market doesn't collapse and Donald Trump doesn't have us blown up and God knows what else. Who's the next couple of IPOs? You think you're going to get their head above the parapet? Who are you expecting to come out next from the group of companies that we talked about, or others, or maybe a big buyout or whatever? Who do you think's the next real prominent player?
Wow, you're putting me on the spot there. It could be, just off the top of my head, it could be the MD Lives or Doctor on Demands might not be that far behind Teladoc if they can follow that traction. But in terms of other companies in our digital health space, one that I have my eye on, they're still pretty early stage, but I've been really impressed with what Health Verity is doing. Have you followed them at all?
Not at all. Say a bit about them.
Yeah, so Health Verity was started by IMS veterans, now IQVIA veterans. So what they're doing is they're connecting multiple different parts of the healthcare ecosystem, their data, in a really interesting way, where they essentially say you contribute your data, obviously de-identified, right, to this ecosystem, and through that you can essentially have permissions for connections to buyers off this marketplace. They call it a marketplace of data. So on the same marketplace, if I'm a pharma company, I can go to Health Verity and I can link together, and they link it in the back, by the way, with blockchain. One of my first commercialized versions I've seen of blockchain, where they are actually using blockchain to connect a patient journey from data from Athena, data from NextGen, but also data from Amgen, from McKesson, from 3 other biotech companies, all of which are connecting with the same patient. You can buy that in a package, and it's a two-way agreement where they have to decide to give it to you, you decide to buy it, and it all gets packaged together, which, the value of data like that, even de-identified data. I think that's pretty interesting, and they seem to be growing like crazy based upon the number of partners and total number of patients they have in that marketplace.
Yeah, there's a number of sort of these data companies. There's Innovacor, and obviously, by some extent, Prealize, you're a data supplier, you're a data user rather than
we're not a seller of data.
Right. There's a bunch in that space where you have people who are like doing plays around data, and that continues to be a really interesting space. I think the other is there's still a couple of sort of, I would say, domain specific quasi monopolies who've grown in digital health. I mean, the one I still like is Doximity, which has got all those doctors on board and is still finding more and more ways to do interesting stuff with them.
Yep,
I think that's another one. I wonder if those guys, Jeff and his team there are thinking about coming out. Every time I see Jeff, he says, "Oh, we're profitable and we haven't spent the money that we raised yet." So I'm going to say, well, in that case, you should probably figure it out. Although maybe he saw Jonathan Bush on TV and decided he didn't want to go public, so I don't know.
No,
I think that's it. And then I'm wondering about these, it's going to be interesting to see these actual delivery systems. One Medical obviously has raised a lot of money.
Sure.
Is thinking about it. On the other hand, the valuation they have, compared to the revenue for a supplier.
They got some work to do, but it feels like they're on a path, right? They probably have to look at an IPO sometime in the next couple of years in order to return that for investors. So I think that's a good call too.
There is that. All these folks want their money back. Yeah.
Well, I think the other ones that you have to ask about is these new age health insurance companies, now that you mention it, right? So maybe it's more likely that they get acquired than IPO, but if you look at everyone from Collective to Clover to Oscar, Devoted just started, but if you look at these types of new age health plans and health models, or not all health plans, but in that kind of ecosystem of new forms of health insurance or health plan, that's probably an area that I would look that somebody's going to come out of with either some serious exits or IPOs. Just based on the amount of money they've raised. The amount of money they've raised.
Hopefully not the alternative, right?
Right, the alternative is they get acquired.
But I kind of look at that. They've raised a lot of money, those guys, hundreds of millions. And Oscar's raised $1 billion. You do know the United Health Group has, annual profit is like $12 billion. It exceeds them by such an order of magnitude that, they could obviously buy it. And they bought a little remote monitoring company the other day, right? They bought... I'm blanking on the company they bought. United just bought.
Was it?
No, they bought
monitoring.
With a V. UPMC.
Vivify Health.
Thank you.
Yeah, Vivify. That's right.
Good having you on this show, Ryan, because you remember all the stuff I don't. I'm pretty
fill in where I can.
Fantastic. Yeah. All right. Okay. Last question. So let's say we're back at HLTH, or they've sold out and there's a new successor, or Instant Health 2.0 done a rejigging. I'm not on the inside enough to know what's going to happen there, or whomever, somebody else coming. We're in the desert or we're somewhere at a
Yeah.
conference with thousands of people. In 5 years' time, are we going to be patting ourselves on the back, or are we going to say, we had all that money, we kind of screwed it up? What do you think?
I'm an optimist, so I'm going to say we're going to be patting ourselves on the back. I think that, I always remember the quote that Bill Gates said at a HIMSS event that I saw him speak at, going way back, where he says, we always underestimate what we can do in 1 year, and we overestimate what we can do in 1 year and underestimate what we can do in 10. And I
have to bust you for this. This is not Bill Gates' quote. This is Roy Morris' quote. I was listening to the live stream from Expo Med this afternoon, and Daniel Kraft also attributed to Bill Gates. Roy Morrow, who founded Institute of the Future where I worked, that's his quote. Bill Gates stole it.
You're exactly right. So he
made Gates stole it.
And he may have credited him, but I remember him telling it, and I had never heard it before. And I think that in healthcare, you almost need to apply. Maybe you say you underestimate what you can do in 15 years or 20 years, right? Maybe it's a longer time, but I think that we're in a really interesting place. It's not naive where we are now. We've got all certainly you and I have the scars to show of it, but we're as an ecosystem very similar place where we know where it is. We now have the government support to really accelerate this movement away from the monoliths to much more open ecosystem with these APIs, the Smart on Fire, combined with the money that's now there and the sophisticated investors and the flood of entrepreneurs that we have now second generation, third generation entrepreneurs in the space that we're seeing. I think that I think we're going to be patting ourselves on the back in 5 years. We have this conversation.
All right. Well, let's quit it there on an optimistic note. I've been talking with Ryan, a trip sort of down memory lane into the present and back again and round again with my friend Ryan Tarzy. Ryan, thanks for coming on THCB. It was great seeing you last week. Great chatting with you today. I'll look forward at a later date to hearing more about what you're getting up to with Prealize, but it was a lot of fun chatting with you, and thanks for the conversation.
Always a pleasure, man. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And have a great night, and we'll have to do it again in 5 years.
Maybe even before that. All right.
Exactly. All right. Sounds good.
Bye.